Now, Sir Keir Starmer has come under fire for welcoming into Britain an alleged extremist who labelled British people dogs and monkeys and called for Zionists to be killed. Well, the Prime Minister said he was delighted that Alaa Abd El-Fattah had arrived from Egypt, where he'd spent 6 years as a political prisoner. Well, we're joined now by the Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice. Richard, thank you very much for joining us on the programme. I see your leader, Nigel Farage, has just said that he's reported El-Fattah to counter-terrorism policing. Why has Nigel Farage taken that step?
Well, as you've just highlighted on various news headlines, this is an alleged extremist who has tweeted some truly abhorrent, vile things, both racist, anti-Semitic, and inciting violence. I mean, he literally called for colonialists and Zionists to be killed, and the more of them, the better. He called Brits dogs and monkeys, and this was well known about, it transpires. And so we are calling for his citizenship, which, by the way, was granted by the Conservatives just 4 years ago. I mean, it's all very well for all the Tories to say, oh, woe is me, we didn't know. They granted this thug citizenship 4 years ago. They should hang their heads in shame. And it is truly abhorrent. So, yeah, we're calling for him to be arrested, for his citizenship to be revoked, and for him to be deported back to Egypt. We don't want people like this in the United Kingdom. And for our Prime Minister to say it was his top priority to import a racist, anti-Semitic thug tells you all you need to know about the priorities of this Labour government.
Well, Richard, we've learnt today that Sir Keir Starmer wasn't aware of those posts when he announced that he was delighted that this top priority had been achieved. But we have heard those apologies and regret from Alicia Kearns and Ian Duncan-Smith, those Conservatives who had campaigned for him to be brought to Britain during his detention in Egypt. Well, Richard, this man, El-Fattah, he got his citizenship because his grandmother gave birth in Britain, and he acquired the citizenship in 2022. Do you think that that process is illegitimate? I know Reform have said they've reported him to the police, but would you scrap matrilineal citizenship as well?
Well, the fact is, we don't want these sort of people being granted British citizenship. And just because his grandmother may have been British doesn't give him the right to demand British citizenship and be such a racist, anti-Semitic thug. It's absolutely unforgivable. And it was well known about. I mean, he was up for some award in 2014, and that was withdrawn before he was granted it, I understand, because of concerns about some of his previous statements and activity.
But Richard, sorry, you said you don't want people like this in our country, but you didn't point out, Richard Tice, what you might do to prevent this from happening. So would you block matrilineal citizenship or birthright citizenship like Donald Trump has done in the United States?
Well, I think we've got to look at all of this because, this guy was, there was a big campaign to give him citizenship, and frankly, the Tories, they just didn't do any basic due diligence. And by the way, there's been a campaign in Parliament for the last year and a half urging MPs to sign cross-party letters. 100 MPs signed the most recent one. All of these people failed to do the basic due diligence. And I think all of this, what this all teaches us is that everything has to be re-looked at. We cannot tolerate this sort of incompetence from the Foreign Office, from the various people around. And the role of our National Security Advisor, Jonathan Powell, is clearly up for grabs. Apparently he was actively campaigning. Where was his due diligence? I mean, who's going to resign over this incompetence, over this absolute scandal that has appalled our friends in the Jewish community?
Richard Tice, you say everything needs to be looked at. I suppose some of our audience will be listening to this right now and saying, well, what will you actually do? Saying you'll look at things is rather different from saying that you'll commit to changing how citizenship is acquired in Britain. I'm sure, Richard Tice, that most of our... Let me finish this question, Richard Tice. I'm sure most of our audience listening to this right now will say maybe he shouldn't have been given citizenship through the birth of his grandmother giving birth in Britain. Why aren't you able to match the concerns of those viewers?
I am absolutely saying that. He shouldn't have been given citizenship, and we need to relook at all of the issues around why people are granted citizenship.
Okay.
And proper due diligence needs to be carried out. There's just basic, obvious common sense, and that's what we stand for, common sense. And it seems to have completely evaded the Prime Minister, Cabinet Ministers, the Foreign Office, and most of the Tory MPs who previously campaigned for his release.
Just very quickly, Richard Tice, on the announcement the government wanted to lead the news agenda today, this visa ban they've brought in on the DRC. What do you make of the announcement? Do you think it goes far enough?
Well, the absolute truth is I'm not exactly familiar with this detail, but you've got to have proper, strict border controls, and we have to ensure that people coming into the UK are suitable, appropriate people. And if they're not, then they must be removed. It is as simple as that.
OK. Deputy Leader of Reform UK, Richard Tice, thank you for your time this evening. And just so people at home, if they're not aware, that second story we're trying to mention there, Richard Tice, the Home Secretary Shibana Mahmood, announcing visa penalties on the Democratic Republic of Congo due to it not engaging properly on the deportation of failed asylum seekers.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private Internet Access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cybercriminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private Internet Access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GBNews discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GBnews to start protecting yourself digitally today.
Right, well, joining me now is the Labour MP for Brent West, Barry Gardiner. Thank you very much for joining us this evening, Mr. Gardiner. Grateful for your time. We've just heard from Richard Tice there saying, I think he was saying that he would want to change the rules on how citizenship is acquired in the case of El-Fattah, this alleged Egyptian extremist. What are your reactions, first and foremost, to those comments from Richard Tice?
Well, look, I had to laugh to myself when he talked about these incompetent conservatives who had, allowed this man to acquire citizenship. Because, of course, they're all the incompetent conservatives that are now rushing off to join Reform as Reform politicians. So one wonders if he's done his
I don't think James Cleverly, Alicia Kearns and Ian Duncan Smith are lining up to join the Reform Party. And indeed, they seem to campaign very aggressively against the Reform Party. There
are many, as you know, there are many former conservatives who have done so. Look, I think the point is this: the government was wrong not to ensure that the proper security checks were done in 2021. It's not a matter of saying we need to change the way in which people acquire citizenship. There are many people who quite rightly have acquired British citizenship through the matrilineal route and other routes, and that's fine. We welcome people who have who have that connection with the UK and want to do that, want to become part of our society. The point is this, that if they have the sort of record that this man had, it should have been picked up, the appropriate check should have been done, and he should not have been granted citizenship.
But Barry, I mean, here's some of the stuff he said. He said, I hate white people. Yeah. I'm proud of being racist against whites. But how can we have confidence in the system if citizenship is being granted to people when they're saying this on a public platform with their name and their face? They're not exactly hiding this, Barry Gardiner. Are you concerned that other people are being granted citizenship via this route and the proper robust checks aren't being made?
Look, of course, I am concerned that people who we would not want as our fellow citizens are being given citizenship without the appropriate checks on their suitability being done. Anybody who has a record of violence and encouraging violence or of racial hatred should not be fellow citizen of ours, and they should not be admitted as such. And I think that's clear. I wanted to make one distinction, if I might, in what you talked about with the Prime Minister saying that it had been a top priority to secure the release of this man from Egypt's prisons. And we can all recognize that around the world there are regimes who imprison people illegitimately as political prisoners for things that they've done and said against that regime. And if the regime is a bad one, then they were probably quite right to say it. And in that sense, campaigning for the man's release is simply the right thing to do in terms of a humanitarian government saying, look, this man was a British citizen and he should not have been imprisoned for what were, as I understand it, trumped-up charges. The point is this, he shouldn't have been a British citizen in the first place. And that's the point, I think, on which Richard Tice and you and I can all agree.
Now, Barry Gardiner, do you get a bit uncomfortable talking about regimes locking people up on trumped-up charges for things they've posted online, considering the state of free speech in the United Kingdom and how often we're seeing people going through ludicrous processes, being detained at Heathrow Airport by 5 armed officers, for one example, and several others that we could recall as well? When you talk about regimes locking people up, I mean, you must be conscious about the problems we're facing in Britain as well, no?
Yeah. I think Britain is one of the freest countries in the world. There have been some really stupid mistakes, I think, made by the police apprehending people. But that very often, actually, I think we as politicians have to have the blame laid at our door because we haven't framed the laws. We've tried to do the right thing with the legislation, but if we don't frame that legislation properly and the police end up carrying out the letter of the law rather than what politicians actually were intending, then we can't blame the police for that. We have to take the blame ourselves and say, look, we need to make these laws to do exactly what they need to do. That is to stop hatred, to stop, people encouraging violence and aggression. Of course we need to do that. But, when it comes to a comedian, as the case that you're alluding to, I think every one of us thought that was just sheer stupidity. But the police say, well, look, we're not there to make that judgment. We're there to enforce the law. And so I think
Mr. Gardiner, sorry, just move on very quickly. We've got another question I want to quickly get to you. Earlier on in the programme, we did speak to Colette, who's the owner of a hair salon in Nottinghamshire. She's told us that she feels betrayed by Labour for breaking their manifesto pledge, and she says not backing small businesses and changing business rates in the budget. She has now, as many other salon owners have done, banned Labour MPs, following on from thousands of pub owners doing the same. What would you like to say to small business owners like Colette who feel betrayed?
I don't know where I'm going to get my hair done next, but it's getting a bit long, so it probably needs it. Look, the point is this. we didn't break our manifesto pledge in the budget. And I know why small businesses are angry. They're angry because a few years ago, rate relief was given during the COVID period. And of course, it was always a temporary measure to reduce the rates at that time to help businesses through that difficult period. And they knew that these rates were going to come back up. The reevaluation was going to come in and their rates were going to increase. Now, what Labour has done in the budget is said that because this year these new levels are going to hit, we're actually then reducing those. We're giving them relief against that new rateable valuation they're having to pay. So what we did in the budget was to reduce the impact of what always was going to happen. It's the right thing to do to try and help those salons, to help those pubs. And it is the small pubs. If you look at the profits being made by the big chains, they are enormous. I've spoken about them before on GBNews, and we're talking about millions of pounds of profit being made each year by the biggest of the pub chains. It's the small pubs, those really individual landlords who often are, particularly in rural areas, providing an incredible social resource for their community.
Sure, but Mr. Gardiner, the problem is you're saying that we've made these efforts in the budget to help them out, and we want to support small pubs and salons, and in contrast to the bigger companies making millions in profit, but they're banning you from going into their pubs. They're banning you from getting your hair cut. Clearly, what you're saying isn't matching their experience. You're telling them that there's special efforts being carved out in the budget for them, but they're saying actually the rest of the budget is really dreadful for us.
What they've said is that we haven't honoured our promise to reduce those rates. We've honoured the promise to reduce them, but it's to reduce them from what they were always going to come back to be after that temporary measure had gone away. So we've honoured the commitment, but I do understand that actually for them it's a rise in their costs, it's something they feel on their bottom line, but actually it was always there, it was implicit in the relief that was given back in the days of COVID, and people knew it was coming back in, and the businesses need to have made account of that. We've tried to help out in the budget, and I'm sorry that they don't feel it's enough.
An apology there. Barry Gardiner, thank you very much for your time, and good luck getting a pint and a quick trim as well.